The way we lead impacts the way people live. This world needs, truly, human leadership.
These are very basic human ideas, and the foundation of all of that is really recognizing ourselves and life in general as intrinsically valuable, intrinsically and unconditionally valuable. That may sound like a mouthful, but once you get that you yourself have value just by being born, that's incredible.
I'm Brent Stewart, your host. Thanks for listening. This podcast is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. You can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, and find our podcasts, articles, and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. Michael Pearson is an associate professor of management, global sustainability, and social entrepreneurship at Fordham University. He's also a research fellow at Harvard University, but Michael is also the co-founder of the International Humanistic Management Association. This group, comprised of business leaders and professors from around the world, want to transform business education from being institutions that train people to manage into institutions that foster human-centered leaders who honor individual dignity and demonstrate the courage to care for others. Barry-Wehmiller has recently become involved with this group, and leading our participation is Brian Wellinghoff, our Director of Strategy, Improvement, and Culture. On this podcast, we feature a discussion between Brian and Michael about the Humanistic Management Association and what they hope to accomplish.
I wonder if you might start us off with, a story of how humanistic leadership really comes to life in the classroom, maybe a student that it's impacted, or what it looks like when humanistic leadership starts to change minds and hearts in our world today.
Kicking off, I'm just teaching or almost completed teaching a class called Social Entrepreneurship, which is, in fact, a different term for what we could frame humanistic leadership. It's basically bringing your gifts and your talents into a space of contribution to the common good, to solve a problem that is systemic, that is social, that is global, that has connection with the environmental crisis, and seeing yourself as a change agent, as a positive change maker, a contributor, a leader who can inspire himself, herself, and others around it, because that's where they see their natural alignment with their gifts, the talents, the desires, the passions, and what the world needs at this point. And so one example is of this class, which is a rather small class, 12 people, but they were really starting out as a usual college class with case studies, lectures, some kind of conversations, and then worked themselves into the projects that they wanted to contribute to. So they developed projects for themselves in terms of how they would want to contribute to the world. And one student, he ended up sharing about the drug death of his sister and how that inspired him to do something about it. And now that I'm saying this, I'm getting goosebumps, because he was not sharing this at all throughout the whole class. But then he stood up, and at the very end of the sessions, he shared that. And you could hear a needle drop in that classroom. It's like that sharing of vulnerability. And that, in turn, empowered him to really step into what he wanted to contribute to that actually very, very sad, desperating event in his family life. And so he was then at some point also sharing, what, this is great, and what I get present to is how it makes me joyful to contribute to others too. So he was seeing this is not about himself necessarily. It's not that it's not about himself. It's actually about himself and others, an alignment of how he can really share his gifts and bring something and contribute to others. And that made him alive. And when he shared that, I think that the class was resonating with that. It's yeah, pay attention to that. Where in the world do you feel like you can actually contribute, and allow others to contribute to yourself, and really get a sense of being alive out of that. And so that's what I felt was a moment of acknowledgement of what humanistic leadership can be, is, and what we can actually create for everyone. my tagline is that this would be where everybody does that, a world that works for everyone, a world that creates a better space for everyone, a world where we can all be alive and experience our own dignity as human beings, as sentient beings, respecting others, contributing to nature, contributing to healing overall.
When I think of my own business education experience, it was great, but it didn't get to that level of storytelling and engagement. And I think that's the opportunity of humanistic leadership, is to truly have those conversations in the classroom, and also combining great academics and great university leadership with great businesses in our organization today. I know recently you paid a visit to a phenomenal organization in the New York City area, a bakery actually. I wonder if you might speak a little bit about that visit and that experience as we're connecting businesses into this idea of humanistic leadership as well.
Yeah, and many of those organizations actually have been around. It's almost like a revelation to myself, learning about those, but also to everyone that I share this with. Is like, this is possible. It is actually being done, because in business schools and in the public perception, there is this misperception that corporations, large, bad, evil corporations, are the only way that we manage business. And that's not the case. So this bakery was founded by monks. It's called Grayston Bakery, and many in the field of better business, B corporations, conscious capitalism are familiar with that, the sort of the original social enterprise that try to, give people a space in South Yonkers, which was considered to be rather poor, to get meaningful employment, especially for those that were hard to employ, and that's oftentimes mothers that was formerly incarcerated, other people that just didn't have the typical qualifications, but a lot of will. And so they created this bakery as a vehicle to allow people to get empowered, to contribute, and to see themselves as dignified human beings when they were before, when they couldn't. And so Grayston Bakery has then, in the 80s, found a partner in Ben & Jerry's ice cream. And so they produce brownies for brownie-based ice cream, and have done so for a long time. They also do now other products, etc. But that's their main thing. And now they are also sharing at scale, like, how could other organizations do that? So they're working with the Body Shop, with IKEA, and with other larger organizations to really scale up this idea of how you can provide dignity-based employment opportunities to those that typically do not have shot at that. So that's one example out of many that we typically don't look at, but we want to shine a light on these practices and see how they can be a blueprint for anyone, and not necessarily only in the space of open hiring or second chance hiring, or however you want to frame it, but just the general idea. What would the world look like if you are seeing yourself as the person that can make the change happen? If you are empowering yourself and give yourself permission to create a better world, a world that works for everyone, and honor your own dignity, honor the dignity of others, and really create magic through organizing, whichever way. We can call it business, we can call it a political organization, a nonprofit organization, and in the end, doing that at scale, I think, provides really an opportunity for anybody who wants to contribute to a world that works for everybody in a meaningful way.
And that's a long-term part of Bob Chapman's, engagement through Barry-Wehmiller, is that businesses have a powerful way to impact society. And as you were saying, sometimes perceived as big, bad, money-hungry, different things. There certainly are those businesses out there, but there are many businesses that are doing great things. Barry-Wehmiller is hoping to be part of that conversation. We believe that we are. But alongside Grayston Bakery, I encourage any of our listeners to consider looking up second chance employment places, whether it's Nehemiah Manufacturing in Cincinnati, Ohio, or Dave's Killer Bread out in the Oregon area. There are a lot of places, a lot of businesses that are doing good in our organizations, and realizing that it's a harmony of people and performance, not just a focus on the bottom line. It's at the core of this. And Michael, as I've gotten to know you, I think that's a key way to describe what humanistic leadership really is. And so you are really the founder and key part of this field. For our listeners, how would you describe humanistic leadership and how that idea has developed in your time working with other academics.
Yeah, thank you. And absolutely, I think Barry-Wehmiller is a prime example of how these ideas can take root, how they can be accessible to anybody at any level. You don't need to be an academic at all. These are very basic human ideas. And the foundation of all of that is really recognizing ourselves and life in general as intrinsically valuable, intrinsically and unconditionally valuable. That may sound like a mouthful, but once you get that you yourself have value just by being born, that's incredible, especially in a marketplace or in a market-based society in which typically what is valued is that you have a great resume, that you have fulfilled conditions in terms of education or other things, so that you can then enter the game of the market. Now, the market in itself is powerful, beautiful, can do a lot of things, but it cannot provide that kind of gratification or that acknowledgement of your intrinsic value. And that's been an idea discussed all throughout the ages in philosophy and theology, in other places in the humanities, could say at large. And we increasingly find from an academic perspective that these principles really matter in and all throughout for our survival. Like evolutionary biology points to that, but also quantum physics, the hard sciences point to something similar, that there is this harmony, that there is this consonance, that there is this consilience of insights that are available to us that point to this bigger foundational notion that, yes, when we organize in a way that is aligned with our inner core, with our intrinsic value, and that contributes to acknowledging those outside, there is a certain symphony going on. There is something that's harmonic about that. There is something that creates freedom, ease, the space of collaboration, and joy. And so these kind of senses are not typically associated with business. And they are typically associated with happiness, well-being, or flourishing. And so what we're looking to in this humanistic management or humanistic leadership labeling is like, okay, what's the whole point of organizing? What's the whole point of us collaborating? It should be flourishing. It should be well-being, as Aristotle called it, eudaimonia. So this is anything new, and anybody, I assert, that reflects a little bit could say that, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. It makes sense at an intuitive level, and the problem that we have found is that at the academic level, the way we have created the world of business specifically, but we can also say the world of organizations at large, that includes government, universities, churches, et cetera, the army, we have not been very good at implementing these insights. In fact, we have sidelined them, and we call them soft, weak, woo-woo, et cetera, when in fact this is actually the hardest core foundation of our existence. Like who we are as human beings is we are dignified, we aim to survive, we aim to flourish, right? And so using these principles, bringing them into the academic research, studying them through the principles of the scientific method and beyond, as an option, that's what the goal is of the Humanistic Management Association and the international partners, and I think a majority of people overall. And so in that sense, that's been the intention of giving labels, giving or naming those practices, and then really allowing people, giving people the permission to pursue this when in normal contexts, quote unquote, that permission is not there. And people pride themselves in suffering. So it's almost like a skill that our MBA students get when you look on Wall Street. People are suffering, then they're relieving themselves by drug use or by other kind of distractions. But it's really not the kind of world that anybody would necessarily choose if they were following their instincts, intuitions, and a path towards flourishing. So that is.
And there's great things in the literature around the epidemic of anguish, unfortunately, the rise of heart attacks and suicides in American culture specifically, but across most Western cultures and things around the world. And even from my own experience, I remember when I got my first job back in high school, I was taught very quickly how to get through the day with the minimal amount of effort. And I was taught that work is a 4-letter word. And in collaborating with you and in this movement, really redefining, work is part of a dignified, intrinsically valuable humanistic experience. That work hopefully is not something that we get through in 8 hours a day and then live the rest of our lives, but it's integrated in the balance of our lives together. And I believe you find the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's certainly a possibility, right? I mean, nobody will deny that work can be all kinds of things, right? And if we have a choice and if we give ourselves permission, we can create a work in a way that actually serves us, that can be a source of joy, a source of our contribution to, let's say, the solutions to the bigger problems that we're facing right now, which there are many. So the good news is lots of opportunities for anybody to get meaningfully engaged. And what we see in organizations is that is what they're missing. Most people are disengaged at work because they don't have the sense that they're contributing to something meaningful. They don't sense that they have trust in their collaborators. They don't sense that they're safe psychologically and otherwise. And they don't feel appreciated. They feel that their dignity is constantly violated. As Tom Friedman was saying, there is a poverty of dignity. Even though we have material abundance, we don't even know what to do with the material, so we throw it away, which is insane. But that's what's happening right now, and that's where it bites us, where the story of success, of material wealth, and status and power bites us in the rear as a species. It doesn't work.
And I know, Michael, you and I have talked a little about, maybe you can add to this, is when there might be something special about this time right now, that there are additional factors happening in our world. You've done a great job of describing that many of these conversations go way back in human history, all the way to Aristotle and other places. It's inherent in who we are as human beings to look for meaning in the things that we do each day and look to connect with others, those things that could be part of humanistic leadership. But there's also some new things happening in the world today, I think positive and negative, to make this a special time to focus on humanistic leadership and have it really grow and accelerate in our world today. Could you talk about some of the ones that you see?
Yeah, of course, there are all these global challenges around the environment, the climate crisis, climate emergency, other crises with regard to food, poverty. And I think there's this crisis, the fundamental crisis of dignity violations that are persistent and consistent. You can see this in the current geopolitical dimension with wars happening in different ways where people are being denied to exist. And these kind of things are just not fruitful. They're not conducive to our survival, literally. And so we're at a breaking point at many levels, so much so that we understand something needs to shift. We're forced to shift, right? This is a massive breakdown at the societal level. And it will continue until we shift the story around who we are as human beings and what success is and what we actually want in life. So it sounds trivial and simple, but that's, I think, at the foundation of what we're currently experiencing that we didn't experience prior. It's like this is an urgency at a new level, and the questions and the answer, the questions don't shift. The answers might not shift so much, but they need to be packaged newly in a way that they can allow people now, today, to see it as an opportunity, a possibility for them to step into living a life worth living.
And I know you've helped alongside others to capture a vision, a manifesto of what humanistic business education can look like. And we're going to make that link available to everybody listening to this podcast right now, because it is about finding the language and the metaphor and the narrative that describes this newly in our time today. So ancient ideas newly described in our world today. And there are many people participating in this conversation. And so, Michael, one of the things that you've sponsored is a lot of collaboration across different groups and drawing people together. Specifically, we were both part of hosting a phenomenal group of people at one of our Barry-Wehmiller locations in Phillips, Wisconsin, back at the end of March. And I wonder if you might describe a little bit of the run-up to that meeting we were hoping to achieve and some of your experiences while you were there with that group of 20-plus people coming together around this topic of humanistic leadership and how it can change our world today.
Yeah, thank you. And I really thank you and Barry-Wehmiller for the partnership in this endeavor, because this is a truly human challenge and a truly human opportunity as well for leadership, for showcasing what is possible if we collaborate in a different manner. And leading up to this meeting particularly, were lots of other conversations in the decades before in terms of what would it take to create a world that works for 100% of humanity. When we acknowledge that the current world works potentially for a minority, and that minority is shrinking, and even those that are quote unquote wealthy and have status and power, they are fearful. They're not very happy. And so in that context, we're looking at business education specifically as a domain that contributes to this old and outdated narrative of success and legitimizes it in the world. Many people, one of the most popular degrees is the business degree. And that's what you're learning there, is that status, power, and wealth is the goal of life, even though most people will, before they enter the degree, will not necessarily agree. But after that, you see those effects of the education. Education works. It just doesn't work in our favor in the context of creating a world that works for 100% of humanity. So we were gathering in Phillips to look at what can we shift in terms of business education in particular. How can we create a vehicle that allows those professors that are currently in the system to step into their power, basically, to shift and transform the education that they can provide by focusing on the being of leadership, the knowing and the doing of humanistic leadership. And then we created a manifesto that explains what are those elements, the core elements, and cohorts of professors that are exploring that as a possibility. And then the commitment is that we have 5,000 people, 5,000 professors trained by 2025. We hope that there will be more, and anybody that listens to that and is inspired by that, please reach out. As we're working and are committed to transforming business education by 2025.
Michael, I wonder if you might speak specifically to the experience and maybe the flow of the meeting a little bit, because one of the things that we said together was we want to begin as we plan to proceed. And we've been utilizing this framework that a variety of different people in our society today have used. It's the be, know, do framework of conceptualizing things and of looking at education. Barry-Wehmiller has utilized that framework. The military, the United States military has utilized that framework. The Jesuit Consortium of Universities has utilized that framework. So it fits in a number of different places. But I thought it was unique how a group of professors, which would sometimes carry certain stereotypes about it or whatever, I feel like the experience that we had broke down all those stereotypes and really was, I will use the word, an authentic experience. I wonder what word you might put on it or how you would describe that.
Yeah, I would say it's just humans connecting with humans. It was a human experience. You can say truly human or authentically human or however we want to frame it. And I get also from some of the interactions, yes, professors have a certain stereotype, right? I don't necessarily think I live in that stereotype. And because I live in that, like you live in the business world, you see that, no, it's very human. It's very human. And for people from the outside, it's actually surprising how human the various constituents are, right? Stakeholders, we call this stakeholders, but we forget that the people are human. Stakeholders are human. So interacting with people from the UN, the business world, the social entrepreneurship world, the professor world, the academic world, it's like, yeah, ultimately we were able to connect human to human in a way that was giving us all permission to connect at a deeper level, to create commitments at a deeper level, and really to collaborate at a different level as well.
You use the word world a couple of times in there. And that's, I think, a question that some of our listeners might have. Well, is this just for the United States? Is it just for North America? I know your own background. You're not someone who's born in the United States. If you could speak to your perception of how this, is it a universal thing around the world that we need to do? Is it about an interconnected world? And how did the meeting reflect that?
Yeah, so I mean, the challenge is really the current narrative of success is a global one, right? Even though we see right now this globalization movement falter by having more tribal movements in the form of nationalist movements, the real opportunity is to have a universalist narrative, which I think we can claim is rooted in dignity and flourishing. Emerge and really allow humans to connect with one another, not Chinese with Americans, not business people with politicians or whatever it may be, but humans. And the meeting did that. We had representatives from Latin America, from Europe, from North America, from the various groups that we talked about, business, the UN, social entrepreneurship, and academia. And yeah, we all connected at a different level than we would typically believe we can connect it, right? There's a lot of guard, there's a lot of decorum, there's a lot of wanting to please that's disguised insecurity, and that wasn't there. And that kind of psychological safety, that trust that was established, that common purpose that we all shared, it was just amazing to see how that can unfold into new creative opportunities that really enlivened me. I think they enlivened you, they enlivened everybody that was there. So it was really like an empowering and enlivening and enlightening gathering.
It was truly enlivening for me. It was a great experience, a phenomenal group of people to be a part of. What has been even more enlivening is how that has continued past that meeting in a variety of different ways. And you mentioned already one of the outcomes was to come up with a manifesto that describes in just short in one page what that is. The second thing is we talked about an academy of humanistic leadership that will be by professors for professors. We're starting to take some steps with. Could you describe that dialogue and what we hope that to be?
Yeah, and there is this incredible energy, almost pent up energy of everyone in the room to do something that can make a difference at scale. And what we're testing right now as a pilot project is a humanistic leadership academy where we can train ourselves, where we can coach each other in terms of what it looks like to be that kind of professor in the classroom that will enlighten, enliven, and empower the students to come out of the experience to be a positive change maker in the world. And so that's the first step that we're currently engaging in. And then the second step is to really magnify those cohorts, have many of those cohorts and have them scaled out, have them be globally representative, and then really create the space for people to coach and develop and train each other around those local issues that might emerge, and develop potentially standards at the accreditation agencies that would make such professorial pedagogical training mandatory, if you will, and support students, support professors, support everybody else in the ecosystem, ultimately provide a much better student or graduate to come out to serve in businesses and in society in a way that they can create sustainable value, social value, human value.
Yeah. And so for all of our listeners, we're launching cohort programs that'll continue to roll out, that we're piloting and building, in addition to sort of one-off sessions that a variety of professors can tap into. And if you're interested in getting more information on those, you can reach out to Michael and myself and our various information that we have. The other thing I think it's important to say is it's not just one meeting in March that has this movement going forward. There was another session more recently this last week, which is just another of many different groups and sessions, people meeting, collaborating under all sorts of different banners and names to come together. And Michael, you kicked off that session. I wonder if you might describe a little about it and how it again evidences the global nature of this conversation.
Yeah. So, as the part of the Humanistic Management Association, we are hosting a number of platforms. And this one, hosted at Harvard University, by our colleague Manolo Guillen at the RCC was designed to be an interaction between business people, CEOs, and academia to explore the potential of humanistic leadership more. And so there were 3 days, one dedicated to understanding dignity, the foundation, and then the goal, which was flourishing, and then how do you create optimal work to integrate those both in organizations. And so the framework is the humanistic leadership and humanistic management framework. And it was a phenomenal experience, a very, very intimate experience again, and a very human and humanizing experience. And I'm glad you were there. You got to experience that. We're exploring other opportunities with business leaders specifically to see how can we allow what's already working to be amplified. How can that inform teaching? How can that inform research? And how can that be of service to a broader community of those that actually want to see organizations, I think as Michael Gelb and Raj Sisodia call it, of the healing process, like healing organizations, right? And so that was that opportunity. I wanted to share another opportunity and conversation that's happening with media and artists around creating this new story of success, the new narrative, and moving it from the margin to the center. So we have been able to work with a number of producers. We have been working with some producers, but we're also expanding that. And if anybody here listening in is interested in that space, bringing these stories out in a more public domain, that's a fantastic other pathway that we're pursuing right now.
That's phenomenal. And I'll tell you at that meeting, just for those looking to add to their library of things to read, Donna Hicks from Harvard was a great contributor to the meeting at the RCC. She's written Leading with Dignity. Also, Matthew Lee was presenting on flourishing, works with the Human Flourishing Project at Harvard, another great collaboration. And Manolo Guillen, who Michael mentioned, wrote a great book, An Alignment with Humanistic Leadership on Motivation in Organizations. Has some great conceptual frameworks for those. So if you're looking for more information, those are all great things. But as we're talking about humanistic leadership here, something that was very human at that session were two special guests. And Michael, I wonder if you might speak to those special guests and how that impacted you and perhaps the others around the room who were there.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, so I have 3 sons, Max, Leo, and Lucas. And my wife decided she wanted to go to London at exactly the same time when I had this commitment with Manolo and at Harvard. And so typically I would either say, well, I'm not going to go, or I try to find somebody that can take care of my kids. But then I connected with Manolo and said, listen, can I bring them? And he's like, yes. And they were very accommodating. And it was like they were the 2 little superstars there. They sat in the lectures. They listened to it. They saw their dad in a different context. And it was interesting to have that dynamic be part of an academic business or conversation, which did humanize, right? I think, Brian, many of the folks were also saying, thank you for bringing them. This was adding value. And one of the conversations or suggestions was raised, what would change in boardrooms if you had kids present? What would change in faculty meetings if kids were present? Would we conduct ourselves that way? And of course, we don't know what the alternative meeting would have looked like, but I can tell you that my sons were highly, highly appreciative. They felt that they were honored. They got to know something different about their dad, but also about the world. And I think it does present some huge opportunities for the world in general if we involve children early on in this process and take them as contributors, not as small little people that don't know what they're talking about yet.
Yeah, I also happen to have 3 boys. And so when Michael brought children, if it were mine, I'd be worried about, oh my gosh, how are they going to behave the time that they were there? Well, they were phenomenal. And I would truly agree with Michael that they added something to the session, that it brought humanity more deeply into the room, even with the sharing of food at dinner and a variety of different things. And so I hope that gives everybody that's listening right now the conception of who you can invite into the room, whatever room that might be, to enhance the humanity that's present there and that's present in your minds and in your hearts as you move things forward. We know that if you're listening today, that there's something about this truly human leadership, this humanistic leadership that touches your heart. And if you're looking for an expression of that, we want to close today with providing just a few ideas about how you can continue to have that in your world today. I'll lead off with one and invite Michael to share some as well. From the Barry-Wehmiller perspective, there's so many things that can be powerful, but the two most powerful things we continue to find are true listening and true recognition. And so if you're listening to this podcast right now and you're getting something from it and you want to take that into action to help make a more humanistic world tomorrow, think about how you can listen more deeply, more humanly, more empathy with those around you. And then secondly, take any opportunity you can to recognize, thank, and appreciate other people. It can just be a short message. And if you want to look on our website for other information, we have a simple methodology to create those messages, but it truly helps create and reinforce goodness in the world to share recognition messages with others. Michael, other thoughts for our listeners today they can put into practice or be part of this movement as they move forward from today?
Yeah, it's just a reflection on who they want to be in this world and what it means for them to be treated with dignity. Because I think one of the conversations that we had is like, this was just a new aha for me, is that mostly we are actually not present to our own dignity. And that's where the breakdown is. It's not so much in honoring others, etc. It's more in ours, honoring ourselves. And Donna Hicks was pointing to that as that was the source of transformation in South Africa. That was the source of transformation in many conflicts, is when people took on their own dignity. And Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu and all those folks that she had been connecting with were sharing that. And so what would the world look like if everyone here would takes this on, standing in their own dignity? So that's an invitation. I'm looking at that myself. I find that fascinating. That seems like such an overlooked lever of change. And then, of course, share stories that you have about better business practices, better organizational practices, anything around that so that we can enrich this conversation. So that's the invitation.
Yeah. Make sure to check out the blog post that hosts this podcast on trulyhumanleadership.com. You'll find the manifesto that they talk about embedded in the blog post, as well as a video about one of the gatherings of the International Humanistic Business Association. If you want to find out more, don't forget to connect with us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller. And you can find more podcasts, articles, and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening.